So in 3 weeks, 16 of us from Rising are going to be actually in Israel, and we're going to be on the Israel study tour. And one of the things I keep telling them is to get prepared, because there's going to be a lot of walking, a lot of hiking when we're in Israel. We have to go see a lot of sites, and so you probably want to start exercising now and preparing yourself and getting ready so you can make the most of your experience. And one of the other tips I told them is if you have your shoes that you're going to be wearing, make sure you're actually wearing those shoes now so you can kind of break them in. And I'll be the first one to tell you that's what I need to do, because for the last 5 Israel study tours that I've been on, I've had the same pair of boots that I've worn for pretty much the whole time, and I broke them out and realized that they were kind of worn out, had some holes in them, and the tread was getting a little worn out on the bottom. So went to REI and got myself a new pair of shoes at their garage sale, and now I have to break them in, because I don't want to get to Israel and try to break in a new pair of shoes, because as you know, if you've ever broken in a new pair of boots, or maybe even if you've had a baseball glove and it's brand new, you have to kind of wear them in a little bit so that they feel comfortable by the time you get there, and you don't just get blisters the whole time. And kind of the same thing when it comes to these spiritual disciplines, these spiritual exercises. As we've been talking about, we're halfway through our series, or coming up to the midpoint here, and the idea is, if at first when you're trying on these spiritual disciplines, whether solitude and silence, or whether prayer, or even celebration, as we talked about last week, it might be a little uncomfortable. It might not fit very well on your soul or your life, because you're not used to it. And so you got to kind of break them in, and eventually they'll become comfortable. And so that's what I'm doing here with my new pair of shoes, and that's what we also need to do when it comes to our spiritual walk and these spiritual exercises. And you know, I'm out here, it's a kind of warm day for February, and if you know, it feels like spring. You've probably seen the signs of spring out there as you look around, and you see the flowers budding. I can hear the birds chirping, and I kind of wonder if God maybe gave us the seasons of the year as this kind of annual reminder of kind of our lives, where, you know, in fall everything kind of falls apart and everything dies and dies off, and winter everything's cold and kind of nasty, and then you get spring and things start to warm up and the birds start chirping, and you can see signs of life, things turning green here on the trees and bushes around me. And it's this reminder that there's a cycle, and kind of like we just talked about last week, Ecclesiastes 3, where Solomon says, hey, there's a time for everything. There's a season for everything under heaven, every purpose under heaven. And so I just kind of think maybe God gave us this reminder that, hey, there's a time for that. And so last week we talked about celebration, and this week we're talking about something called confession. And it seems like those are like on polar opposites, but they kind of blend into each other. They lead into each other. And I think God did that for a reason, because he wants us, yeah, there's a time to celebrate, but there's also a time to mourn. And last week we saw the Israelites in Nehemiah Chapter 8, and they said, hey, you know what? It's not the time to mourn, it's the time to celebrate. It's New Year's Day, it's the Day of Atonement this month. We're going to celebrate this week-long festival called the Feast of Tabernacles. So he's like, now is not the time to mourn, now is the time to celebrate. But eventually, there is a time to mourn. And there is a time to kind of, you know, look back. And so that's what we're going to see happen in chapter 9 of Nehemiah, which is going to play into the spiritual discipline of confession. Because we're going to see them look back and stop. And so, you know, I think maybe I should do just that. It's like, I think as it comes to these spiritual disciplines we've been talking about, part of the problem is that we just never stop. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to put down my backpack, gonna sit down, and let's talk. I wonder if God tells us we need to stop for these different things, because if we don't, then we won't think about these things. And so if we don't stop, it's hard for us to celebrate. If we don't stop, it's hard for us to pray. If we don't stop, it's hard for us to have silence and solitude. And if we don't stop, it's hard for us to practice confession, the spiritual discipline of confession. And it's interesting, in Nehemiah Chapter 9, you guys already read it in your small groups, is that you see the people, after celebrating and partying for 3 weeks, they stop, the 24th day. And it says they kind of look back. And if you look through what you just read, it's actually kind of fascinating. It's actually the longest recorded prayer in the entire Bible. Okay, so this is prayer, this corporate prayer of all the people as they're coming before God and they're confessing. And I love it. If you kind of get caught up, trying to read the entire Bible, the Old Testament, all the historical narrative, turn to Nehemiah chapter 9, because it's basically a summation of everything from all those other books. In fact, if you read it, you kind of look at it this way, it's almost by paragraph. If you look at 7 to 8, he's talking about Genesis. And if you look at 9 to 12, it's Exodus. If you go 13 to 15, it's Leviticus. And then 16 through, 21, it's Numbers and Deuteronomy. And then he moves into Joshua, verses 22 to 25. And then he moves into the time of the Judges. And he's kind of just going through the history of the people. And you actually see 6 cycles repeated. These seasons, where it's like they go from winter to spring, or they go to summer to fall, and they keep going through the cycle. And the cycle is that the people are disobedient. They go against God, they turn against him, they're wretched. It's like they just ignore him, they just deny him, they spit on him in that sense, they kill all the prophets and everything. And the cycle is this: they do that, eventually it gets so bad that it's like winter, and then they cry out to God. And because God, as it keeps saying in this, as you just read, says, God, you are compassionate, God, you are patient, God, you are loving, God forgives, and God brings them back. God sends them a deliverer. God, kind of starts over with them. And you see this springtime where they fall back in love with God, and then they go back, summer, they kind of make it a little while, then fall, things start to fall apart, and then it's winter again. And so it's a cycle repeated 6 times, you see, in Nehemiah, and over again. Chapter 9, it's about the people's wretchedness and God's faithfulness, and how God has been there. And basically it's them fessing up. And I love what Chuck Swindoll said, because he said, what you see is this pattern in Nehemiah chapter 9. You see, first off, they look up. They look up to God. At the very beginning, they look up to God. They praise him for who he is. They're like, man, you created everything. Everything owes its existence to you. You're the sustainer. You're the provider. And they look up and they see God. And their response when they look up and they see God is then they start looking back. And they look back at their history. They look back at their story. They look back at what God has done and what the people have done. And then when they look back, they start looking in. And they start looking in at themselves going, what, am I doing the same thing? And how have I gone against God? And finally, at the very end, they look ahead. And I think it's this good pattern for us, because they look up, they look back, they look in, and then they look ahead. And I want you to think about, because every time they look back and they look in, the result is confession. And basically, if you think of confession, just think of it as fessing up. It's just being honest. It's getting real, being authentic, and owning up to your responsibility in your sin and your failures, and you're turning your back on God. And so that's what these people do. And basically at the end, after they look back and they look in, and they look ahead and they say, God, would you do it again? God, you've been so faithful to our people despite all their sin, despite all their disgrace, you've been graceful. And so God, for the 7th time, would you forgive us? God, would you give us a do-over as a nation as we've rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem? Would you give us a fresh start? Give us that do-over, give us that mulligan where you're saying, hey, I'm going to wipe the slate clean and you can start fresh. And I think that's something to consider, because when we think of confession, I don't know what you think of, but I think we think of it kind of as a negative thing. But I want you to think of confession as being something positive. It's always for our benefit, just like prayer and celebration and solitude and silence. It's not for God's benefit, it's for our benefit. And the same thing is true of confession. It's not like God's up there going, well, I didn't know you did all that stuff. Wow, thanks for informing me. It's him going, no, you need to get this stuff off your chest, because when you look back and you look in, if you've already looked up and you've seen who I am, there's a big discrepancy between the two. And so then you need to look ahead by looking to me for forgiveness. And so I just want you, as you are in your small groups this week, as you're going to be talking about the spiritual gift, if you will, the spiritual blessing, spiritual discipline, spiritual exercise of confession, think of it as a positive thing. It's for your benefit. And I want you to discuss, how is it for your benefit? But the whole point of all this, all the spiritual disciplines, is so that we can train ourselves to be godly. And I feel like this past week we have 2 examples of what we're thinking of when we think of training ourselves. And the Olympics are wrapping up, or they wrapped up by the time you watch this. And we talked about this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, where Paul tells the people of Corinth, which is where the Isthmian Games were, he says, man, all these people are going into strict training, and they're doing it for a prize that's not going to last. right? They're doing it for something that's not going to be eternal. And he's saying, but when we spiritually train ourselves, when we do these exercises, when we commit ourselves to them, when we start getting it to where it's natural and it fits well, like your boot, you're not getting blisters from it, it becomes natural and it starts to feel good and comfortable, he's like, you're the one that's blessed. It's for you. It's for your benefit. It's not for God's benefit. It's for your benefit. And I think we had another example of this week because, as you know, Billy Graham passed away, and he was this. I don't know, how do you describe Billy Graham? I mean, he's just this pinnacle of what we should be trying to achieve, right, as believers. And Billy Graham, I don't know if you know this, but he played a part in my story. Back when I was in 8th grade, they had a Billy Graham crusade in Anaheim, California, and we went like 4 out of 7 nights, I think, and that kind of helped lay the groundwork for this transition that took place in me from seeing my relationship with God being this religious obligation to being this relationship with the God of the universe. And it kind of followed up with the summer camp I went to, and that's kind of where I really feel like I owned my faith. And I just think of Billy Graham, and I think of him, he trained himself to be godly. And I just love the fact, when I found out that he had passed, it was almost like a celebration to me, because he finally got to see what he had been talking about his entire life. He arrived at the pearly gates, if you will, and I just know that Jesus saw him and embraced him and said, well done, good and faithful servant. And I just think he's experiencing everything he talked about for the past 99 years of his life, right? But he trained himself to be godly, and he took that seriously, the spiritual disciplines. That's what he did. And so now he's reaping the benefits of that, and those benefits of godliness, they not only in this life, but in the life to come. And so he didn't just train himself, physically, and it just kind of all came to an end, and there was no real lasting reward. He had a reward that went on forever and ever and ever. And so that's what God wants for us. And so that's why we have to spiritually exercise. And so as we're, again, at this half point in our series, I hope that you are really starting to train yourself to be godly and trying to figure out, okay, how do I exercise these blessings that God has given us, He's provided for us so that we can encounter Him, and how am I implementing those into my everyday life so that I can strive to be godly, try to become more like Him, and put myself in the path of Jesus. So think about these things, talk about these things. How do we implement confession into our everyday lives so that we can be blessed by this spiritual discipline?